To kick off this explainer, consider this absolutely staggering statistic. 90% of megacities worldwide are vulnerable to rising sea levels. This isn't just some distant, abstract problem for future generations to figure out, you know? This is an existential threat happening right now, posing a very real, immediate danger to millions of people as waters creep higher into the places we call home.
So let's dive into a truly fascinating solution to our climate crisis. What if the future of humanity wasn't on land or in space, but floating across the oceans? As sea levels continue to rise and Earth's population grows, imagine a future where massive, floating cities become home to millions of people. These futuristic civilizations could generate their own energy, produce their own food, and travel across the oceans like giant nations on water. Some floating cities could become centers of innovation and wealth, while others might develop their own laws, cultures, and identities. But what happens when cities are no longer tied to countries or borders? We're going to explore whether floating cities are humanity's greatest adaptation or an unprecedented geopolitical and psychological challenge. Before we continue, if you're enjoying these mind-bending future scenarios, make sure to like this explainer, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Last Human Era for more incredible journeys into the future.
Section 1. Adapting to Rising Seas.
Now, you might be wondering, why the ocean? Well, think about it. 2 out of every 5 people live within 100 kilometers of the coast, and our coastal cities are quite literally running out of space. As rapid urban population growth pushes more and more people closer to the water, housing costs skyrocket to prohibitive levels, which effectively squeezes the poorest families out. We simply have nowhere left to expand on land without facing massive flooding risks. Looking at this trajectory, the UN points out that by 2050, 9 out of 10 megacities will be coastal. This has sparked a total paradigm shift in urban planning. Instead of fighting the rising sea with concrete walls that inevitably fail, we're learning to adapt and actually make the sea our home. Real estate investors and multinational companies are already jumping on what they're calling blue real estate. They're relocating to these floating platforms in a concept dubbed future-proof living to avoid the trillions of dollars in potential losses from sinking cities.
Section 2. Engineering the Ocean Metropolis. To really wrap our heads around how we build a metropolis on the water, we have to look at the incredible engineering behind Very Large Floating Structures, or VLFS. And just to be clear, this isn't like dropping a big boat in the water. These are massive, human-made islands engineered to safely house thousands of people. There's an amazing contrast between the 2 main designs engineers are using right now. On one side, we have semi-submersibles. These feature a raised platform sitting high above the sea level, supported by these deep submerged column tubes. They are heavily engineered to absorb the brutal, crashing waves of the open ocean. On the other hand, we have pontoon structures. These are much more flexible platforms that rest directly on the water's surface, perfectly designed for calm, protected waters like lagoons and natural harbors. And the crazy thing is, we're already seeing these concepts become reality. Take UN Habitat's Ocean X Busan prototype in South Korea. Initially designed to accommodate 12,000 people, this place will function entirely off the grid. It pulls this off by utilizing 6 brilliantly integrated systems. It treats its own closed-loop water, grows food right there in innovative floating greenhouses, and generates 100% of its operational energy through floating and rooftop solar panels. It's even designed to regenerate the coastal habitat using artificial reefs right below the surface. It's an absolute game changer.
Section 3. Surviving the extreme elements.
But let's be real. The ocean is an incredibly hostile environment. So how will an entirely ocean-based city avoid total catastrophe when the weather turns violent? Developers are taking this incredibly seriously. They're working with top experts, like the MIT Center for Ocean Engineering, to literally future weatherproof these structures. The platforms are designed to be anchored using something called biorock. This is amazing. It's created by exposing underwater minerals to electrical currents to form a robust, limestone-like structure that actually grows stronger over time. This technology allows these cities to withstand extreme floods, massive tsunamis, and literally Category 5 hurricanes.
However, the crucial point here is that surviving the initial terrifying impact of a storm, that's really only half the battle. The day-after priorities are absolutely paramount. The architecture might hold, sure, but if the power lines go down and the sewage system floods, you immediately face massive health hazards and outbreaks of disease. A floating city's vital life support systems, the freshwater supply, the electrical grid, and the sewage treatment must be completely internal and remain fully functional the day after a catastrophe strikes.
So the architecture can survive the ocean, but what about us? Can the human mind? Let's move to a darker reality and see how this builds into an entirely different challenge. Because while we can engineer concrete and biorock to withstand the most extreme physical elements nature throws at us, human psychology is much, much more fragile.
Section 4. The psychological toll.
Living isolated on the ocean forces people out of their natural terrestrial habitat and into a highly confined, closed system. It's a reality that severely challenges human nature, especially when you're living, working, and sleeping in an environment from which you cannot easily just up and leave. And we already have documented data from commercial seafarers on what this actually looks like. When you combine prolonged social isolation, irregular sleep, and the sheer, unending monotony of being surrounded by water, the psychological outcomes are severe. It frequently leads to intense emotional burnout, severe physical ailments like stomach issues and eating disorders, and truly alarming rates of depression and anxiety. Emotional exhaustion in a closed maritime system just feeds this intense sense of alienation.
And this psychological degradation isn't just sad, it's incredibly dangerous. Consider this for a second. 85% of human factor marine accidents occur precisely due to a loss of situational awareness caused by this intense fatigue and stress. A floating city is going to have to actively manage the mental health, socialization, and recreational needs of its citizens, or it risks total internal collapse.
Section 5. Laws of the ocean.
Beyond the psychological toll on individuals, floating cities present an absolute nightmare on a global scale regarding international maritime law. Some cities could become incredible centers of innovation, but what happens when they want their own laws and borders? To understand this legal headache, we have to look at the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. They have a very strict definition of an island. It must be a naturally formed area of land. True islands have tremendous geopolitical value because they grant the coastal state a massive exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, of 200 nautical miles for fishing, mining, and resource extraction.
But here's the catch. Man-made floating cities completely fail that definition. They legally classify as artificial islands. This means they do not possess the legal status of an actual island, they generate absolutely no territorial sea of their own, and under international law, they're restricted to a mere 500-meter safety zone around their edge. You can't just float out into the middle of the ocean and claim a massive new maritime territory.
To avoid this jurisdictional chaos, early projects are playing it very safe. Take the Maldives Floating City project, for example. The developers are building this massive floating grid strictly within the existing sovereign lagoon of the Maldives. By doing this, the city operates under the clear, established legal protections and property deeds of a recognized host nation. No new borders, no international incidents.
Section 6. The future of seasteading. But what happens when independent groups try to build mobile nations entirely free from traditional countries? This is a highly controversial concept known as seasteading. As floating civilizations grow larger and more independent, traditional governments may struggle to maintain control. Ocean-based nations could compete for resources, influence, and territory, creating new political challenges never seen before. The Seasteading Institute actually tried to make this independent dream a reality. They spent years testing designs and gathering investors. In early 2017, they seemed poised for massive success after signing an agreement to build a seastead in French Polynesia. But by late 2017, local political misinformation and the sudden cryptocurrency crash effectively derailed the entire project, forcing it to be postponed indefinitely.
This failure starkly demonstrated a painful truth to future developers. It is incredibly risky to tether the survival of innovative billion-dollar climate adaptations to the volatile traditional political process. If the future of human survival relies on fickle political winds, floating cities might sink before they ever hit the water.
Ultimately, we are left with a darker possibility to ponder. If the wealthiest people choose to live in advanced, safe floating cities while others remain on land facing environmental crises, humanity could become more divided than ever. And if these future possibilities fascinate you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because every week we explore the most incredible futures humanity may face. In the end, floating cities could become humanity's greatest adaptation to a changing world, or the beginning of a new era where nations are replaced by mobile civilizations drifting across the oceans. But if you had the opportunity to leave land forever and live in a futuristic floating city, would you take it or stay on solid ground?